Thank you very much, Dr. Kyle Chan, for taking the time to do this interview with us. A week ago, barely a week ago, you published a guest essay on the New York Times, basically saying China is pulling ahead of the US on many key technological infrastructure areas, and the Trump government's current policies are only pushing China further and faster into a dominant position on most of the key important sectors and industries, and basically helping China make the next century the China century. And America is quickly losing time in this race, if I summarize your key arguments correctly. Um, that is quite, I'll be honest, that is quite shocking. I mean, I totally agree with most of what you said, and to many of people in similar circles, China watchers or journalists covering China and the US, a lot of it is pretty obvious. It's basically common sense. But for a Chinese American scholar to write on the New York Times saying this bluntly, that still is very shocking. So why don't we start from there? I'm very curious what kind of reaction you have got from both within the US and China.
The piece was meant to be a wake-up call. Um, it was not meant to be uh, 100% prediction about the future,
Right.
and nor was it meant to be a rigorous analytical comparison sector by sector of where the two countries stand today. Um, but what I want to highlight was the trajectories of the two countries as I saw them in this present moment. And um, and yeah, many of the points that I raised, I think, about China have been raised by others in other articles, publications, reports. Um, the people who follow tech developments in China or China's economy, this is not surprising. But I realized over time that there's a huge gap in understanding. There are the people who do follow China very closely, but there's the rest of the world, there's the rest of the American electorate, the American general population, and also policy folks in DC who I think have not adjusted their view of China in light of um, some trends that go back even 10 years or further. So that was the idea here. And I think I've been getting a number of different reactions to the piece. So I think for those who understood what I was trying to do, um, they were supportive, especially those in the China watching world, supportive of my effort to try to communicate something that they had known but had not been as widely perceived. I think there were those who are very supportive of the Trump administration direction, who were more critical of the piece. Um, and there's an interesting mirror, I think, with some of the more Chinese national responses to criticism of China, where criticisms of the United States, of President Trump himself, and and any idea that the U.S. might not be number one today or in the future is impossible to contemplate. So I have gotten some negative reactions from especially those who believe strongly in what President Trump is doing. Um, so there's certainly that that as well. But I have also gotten from this sort of third group of people who, especially Americans, who believe very strongly in American values, in these what I call the pillars of American power, um, like being able to attract foreign talent, being able to do cutting edge on scientific research. There are those who um, uh, like the fact that I was trying to sound the alarm about the trajectory of the United States. And ultimately, in many ways, the piece was perhaps as much, if not even more, about the US than about China. It's putting the US in a global context, in a context with this US-China competition that I think maybe some Americans might not fully realize. So yeah, it was meant to be a wake-up call, and to that extent, to the extent that people realize that, I think it seemed to strike a chord.
Right. To a lot of the experts studying US-China relations, especially those watching the tech competition closely, economic and tech, um, there's a sense of pessimism, almost desperation. Like, yeah, all that's been said,
Mhm,
needs to be said, is already said, but most of
mhm,
it falls on deaf ears, especially with this current administration. So let's say your piece does wake up some people.
mhm,
Where would you hope those people are, and what could be the best, most optimistic kind of outcome uh, that you are trying to achieve?
mhm, mhm. So I do think that even people connected to the current administration, um, even among folks who are connected to the current Trump administration, among them there are some who are thinking about U.S. competitiveness. And sometimes it's down to the sector level. I mean, there are a lot of people right now connected to Silicon Valley, worried about American leadership in AI. There are, industry by industry, um, people who are worried about their particular industry. And I think this piece helps to connect some of the dots to show that this is a broader set of trends that cuts across, biopharma or consumer internet or these different or even robotics and AI. So for some of these people, I think it helps to um, bring the bigger picture together. Um, the tricky thing is obviously um, the people at the center of all this, nearly one man, may or may not care about some of these arguments, may or may not be reading the New York Times op-ed pages, um, and maybe also some people close to him as well already know some of these issues. They're well aware. Um, but I hope to sort of add more momentum to some of these other voices. I think it's helpful to see what I'm trying to do as part of a broader wave of reports, um, efforts, even sort of back room or sort of informal channel outreach to get this message across. A single article won't do it, but I think together there may be a greater sense of awareness. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
While Elon Musk is not exactly the Silicon Valley type, but as a prominent tech leader, arguably the most prominent in the whole world, who, is very convincing to a lot of people in both countries. There was some hope that he could help rein in some of the crazy and instill some common sense, especially from a technology point of view from a maybe cultural and education exchange kind of view, could do some good. But so
Mhm.
far, it doesn't seem to have done much, and he's kind of already distanced himself from the administration. And also, there's people like David Sachs. Everything
Mhm.
he has done up to this stage is like, yeah, that's the worst kind of Silicon Valley you could hope for in the Trump administration. I wonder if what your feelings are on these tech people supposedly what they could do or are they really doing anything?
Mhm. Mhm. On Elon Musk, it's it's doubly unfortunate that not only were some of his better ideas, like trying to be more proactive in attracting foreign talent, um, those ideas did not gain as much traction um, on the one hand. But even worse, Doge itself has been one of the most destructive wrecking balls through the pillars of American power by cutting public spending on for science, especially in medical research, by helping to um, eviscerate, these agencies and departments that are have been working for, you know, decades in the background, perhaps in a lower profile capacity, but actually feed into the broader, U.S. innovation ecosystem. The Department of Energy or uh, some of the um, some of the NIH, obviously, NSF, FDA. So, I mean, you could go on and name name the agencies that he, with Doge, and others within the Trump administration have helped to really weaken significantly. So on his role, it is almost surprising to me how destructive actually it became. On Silicon Valley more generally, it's an interesting moment because Silicon Valley is changing its attitudes towards China. I can sense the shift, and one of the biggest shifts was there were two shifts, maybe is a good way to put it. There was a shift away from trying to embrace China and enter the Chinese market, right? So it doesn't feel like so long ago when Mark Zuckerberg was going for a jog in the smoggy Beijing air near Tiananmen Square to um, try to uh, gain entry in some form to the Chinese market. And he was rebuffed, and a lot of those efforts were, if anything, progress went backwards. There was a turn among a lot of Silicon Valley CEOs, including Mark Zuckerberg. Also, Eric Schmidt has been very vocal about this, and he actually wrote a actually kind of a similar op-ed to mine
Right. Yes.
before in New
Yes.
York Times. Um, but they have been using kind of China as a foil to say that the U.S. needs to become more competitive, and that actually kind of aligns with some of what I'm trying to do here. So there is that dimension, and then there is this shift now. I think almost a kind of growing admiration for Chinese tech innovation. This um, this pivot away from seeing China as like the iPhone assembly hub and to a source of real, competitors, whether you're talking about, of course, DeepSeek or Unitree Robotics or, from software to hardware. There's this growing respect for Chinese tech capabilities, and in particular, this sense that especially in some of these new emerging industries, and robotics comes up a lot these days, I feel like, that China may have an edge. And that's sort of also what I've been highlighting in some of my work, just in terms of not only the sort of sheer capacity to innovate and do research at the cutting edge level, but being able to manufacture the core components domestically to have the supply chain be geographically concentrated in and around China and the advantage that gives to Chinese tech firms, especially again in the hard tech space, as it were. So that kind of that moment is I can see it across the language used by a lot of the Silicon Valley thought leaders. This sort of I wouldn't call it an embrace of China per se, but just sort of a newfound sort of recognition or even potential like respect for what is happening. So this actually predated DeepSeek in some ways, and in some ways it also was driven by Elon Musk. I think he was one of the earlier ones, or at least the more prominent ones, to start to highlight some of these tech advances in China.
But even if there is this new wave of appreciation for the Chinese model, and which could potentially help the two countries somewhere down the line to reach another kind of consensus or some kind of build some kind of cooperative framework
Hmm.
to benefit both countries' tech and economy. It certainly won't happen in the next how many years? How many years would you say? When should we expect that spark of mutual appreciation to produce some actual positive results again?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest, I was pessimistic in the op-ed itself. And every time I think that the worst might be behind us, there's some new announcement, some new action from the Trump administration that further digs us into a hole. And so the latest turn with um, trying to block Harvard from enrolling foreign students, I just think that, yeah, I didn't think it could get worse, and here we are. Yeah.
Exactly. That brings us to the next big question. As of my count, a couple of hours ago, at least two Hong Kong universities have offered a olive branch, if it will, to any students or scholars potentially impacted by this. But sounds like it won't come that fast, or we don't know. This might soon go to the courts. Sounds like that's
Mhm,
what's
mhm,
happening. But certainly, a lot of people were expecting something like this. Maybe China
mhm,
Initiative 2.0, a lot of people are discussing this,
mhm,
but the Trump administration went ahead and did something even more unimaginable.
mhm, mhm,
Um, so, yeah, where do you see this particular development leading? What are
mhm,
some of the, short-term scenarios you could see for this? A lot of people
mhm,
still haven't been able to wrap their head around this, really.
mhm, mhm. So in the short term, there is just tremendous fear and uncertainty for students, for researchers, anyone without a US passport right now. I can tell you, talking to a whole bunch of different people in the broader university community, that they are really shaken by all of these actions, that they are very fearful, and many are either canceling plans to travel abroad or are even thinking about going elsewhere very seriously. And it's compounded by a number of different actions. So not just the latest move with Harvard, but also all these researchers who relied on NSF and NIH grants, for example, and saw their funding dry up. Many of them are wondering now, these international researchers in particular, they're wondering now, like, why bother staying in a country that where the funding is drying up and where everything's becoming much harder and scarier for foreign researchers. Why not go back to, say, Switzerland or Germany, or for Chinese researchers, go back to China, and then in particular for Chinese researchers, right? There is that extra added fear of always being under suspicion, always, feeling like you might be doing something wrong. There's every move is a risk. And rather than living in that kind of perpetual state of anxiety, um, you know, rethinking perhaps, maybe China is um, a better environment for doing research. So obviously these are very hard decisions. So I can't say that these are that everyone's leaving or everyone's staying immediately. I think everyone's doing a wait and see in some cases, but it's hard to overstate the short term um, impact in terms of just sheer sort of emotional destruction. And this is also affecting people's work. I mean, it's very hard to do research. That's another thing that I feel like is not talked about enough. It's very hard to do research under these conditions, to keep focusing on your work when you don't know what your status is going to be in a few months or a year. So that's a short term. I can talk about the long term or longer term too as well, if that's useful.
Right. The trend obviously started a long time ago, at least during the
Mm,
first Trump administration for any STEM
mm,
scientists and researchers and students. It was obvious, especially in any sensitive kind of scientific fields. Uh,
mm,
yeah. So those who saw it coming probably already reacted in some way. But what about now? Is this expanding to other subjects of study as well? Maybe social sciences, even sociology, like your own field? What do you think? Are you seeing any signs of, more not just science and STEM students feeling threatened and uncertain?
Yeah, I think for the other disciplines beyond STEM, I think it's more about this uncertainty just as um, foreigners living in the U.S.
Mhm.
And about uncertainty over immigration status and um, students wondering about this whether OPT will be kept on, whether they will have a chance to work for a year in the U.S. If you're non-STEM, you get a year. I think if you're STEM, you get some extra time. So yeah, people are many foreign students, foreign undergrads in particular, as well as PhD students, were hoping to stay in the U.S. They were hoping to find jobs here, maybe work for a company or work for a research lab at a university. So now they have to rethink those plans in the face of all this. So I think that that is sort of across the board. I don't know if there's anything in particular about sociology per se, but I think that across the board, STEM and non-STEM, there's just all this uncertainty. Yeah, and it was much bigger. Again, all this was much bigger than the first Trump administration in terms of who is getting targeted, the depth of the actions being taken, and I think the consequences for all of this.
Do you see this spreading to other universities as well? Is Trump only targeting Harvard, or could other universities, even your own university, be affected?
Yeah, there is the possibility, and I can only imagine that um, the my university's administration is frantically trying to come up with a game plan for how to respond. And I think no matter what happens with the court process, so let's say the courts do rule this as a violation of some law or rule um, and overturn it or block the Trump administration from doing this with Harvard and maybe potentially more broadly, it just sends such a powerful chilling effect across all international students and researchers and across the university system that is hard to undo. I think there's a parallel here with the tariffs, where maybe there's a temporary rollback of the tariffs. Maybe there's a temporary pause, but actually the effects continue in many ways, regardless of whether you pull them back or not. Obviously, it's worse to have them, but there are real long-term consequences to that. So either way, it just injected this deep sense of anxiety and fear that I think will continue to persist, even if the actual policies themselves get rolled back in some fashion.
Yeah, exactly. If I were any Chinese policymaker or people running factories, businesses,
Mhm.
I might sigh in relief with the news of the 30-day relief. But really, the only reason I would feel relieved is now I have more time to better
Yeah, yeah.
prepare myself for
Mhm.
what is coming next.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
bought me a little bit more time, but it's not changing anything, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, you can cut me off if this is going too far afield, but um, there is this sort of global war for talent. Different countries, different companies are looking for the best and the brightest. And I think there was a longstanding assumption in the United States that they would all come here, that they would come to our universities, they would start, and this was actually a line that got cut out from the piece, but there was an assumption in the US that the next Google or the next NVIDIA will be built in America. And that is not for certain. And so I think if you're scaring away the very people who could build, the next generation of high-tech companies that and can employ a lot of people and keep the whole country at the technological frontier, um, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot, not just in terms of causing a lot of sort of pain and suffering for those people involved, but in terms of again economic and technological competitiveness.
Yeah, I think I maybe heard this on one of the talk shows as a joke. So this race on AI is really
Mm.
run between our Chinese and their Chinese. So
Yeah, yeah.
whichever side, whichever side you look at this, it seems to hold some truth in it. Now that, at least our Chinese will feel very, very concerned about going there to study AI. So what is going to happen next?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's a joke, but it gets at a serious point, which is just that when you look at the researchers doing top-notch AI research in the United States, whether at universities or at companies, you look at OpenAI's team. There are many foreign researchers. There are many descendants of immigrants, and then there are many Chinese. Researchers, and there are also Chinese American researchers. And this is the other thing that I would point out, even for people like me. So I'm a US citizen. I was born in California, and I'm Chinese American. My family's from Hong Kong. And so, even though we are not subject to some of the immigration issues, the fear of being targeted for being ethnically Chinese or being Asian is very real and really growing. And I think also, and this is getting off on a tangent, but some of the recent questioning in the Trump administration of some of the Asian American staff. Um, that also sends a big red flag to those working on some of these issues in the DC world.
Yeah, actually, I did wanted to ask that.
Mhm.
Even though Trump may not read the New York Times and those people closest to him may not even show the New York Times to him,
Mhm.
publishing that piece in the New York Times could really carry, I can imagine, certain risks for you personally in the United States. Have you felt anything? Do you even fear anything like that?
At this point, I've been I don't want to jinx it, but at this point, um, I think it's worth making the case despite the possible risks and also I think that there's a sense of responsibility just to say something, um, especially when other people are more concerned about their position or their futures. Um, yeah, I think it's especially important, and I think yeah, I wouldn't call it a brave thing per se. I would just say that someone has to say something, and so I'm joining a chorus of voices. I think it helps to think of it in that context that I'm not the only one making this point by any means. That this is really a broader um, set of arguments that many people have been bringing to attention.
Right. I can only say stay safe and good luck. Um,
I have been threatened with deportation by people online, but
I can
so
imagine that too. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
I also wanted to ask, sometime in the last few hours, there's been some more assault on Apple from Trump,
Mhm, mhm,
threats of 25% tariffs if iPhones were not made in the US. I have a suspicion this may have something to do with, the recent book published
mhm.
by a
Patrick McGee,
colleague of
yeah.
mine at the Financial Times. And I've
Mhm,
seen the author going around the talk shows. Again, I'm a big fan of American talk shows. Uh, if these Democrats supporting generally Democrat leaning liberal talk show hosts could, discuss with him, oh, why and how did Apple, outsource all of the resources, all of the know-how, the technology to
mhm,
China, therefore enabling China to become this technological behemoth that is
mhm,
threatening us today. If that kind of discourse, that kind of mindset is openly discussed and taken for granted by even these supposedly liberal leaning artists and talk show hosts.
mhm.
Uh, it sounds like the discourse, the atmosphere in the US society has really turned. I haven't been there in many, many years, but yeah, I'm surprised
Yeah.
oh, but first of all, what do you think about that book?
Mhm. Yeah, so the book itself is really good and it's very detailed. It's very rigorously done, and it brings to light a whole bunch of fascinating details about the relationship between Apple, Foxconn, and China. So yeah, the book is excellent. Um, I think one thing that's happening though is a sort of a pendulum swinging
Mm,
in attitudes towards China and specific facets of the U.S.-China relationship that remind me of the debate over the China shock um, um, research that had come out earlier, actually leading up to Trump's first election win. And the pendulum seems to swing from, um, in this case with Apple and China, the pendulum seemed to have swung from, this is there are benefits to having global integration, that there's sort of mutual gain from, you know, Americans not having to do these jobs and getting more affordable, high quality products from other countries like China. And then, obviously China benefits in terms of jobs and technology and other fa factors. So there's a shift from that kind of view to one that kind of focuses on one side of the equation. So I do think that previously there was too much maybe emphasis purely on all globalization is good. It
right.
doesn't matter if where the jobs go. The products are cheaper. Everyone wins. I actually think that that was a previous, perhaps overly rosy consensus of global trade that did not um, did not recognize some of the, especially the geographic consequences of some of these things for certain communities in the U.S. So I totally see that criticism of that point of view is valid. I think what happened though is sometimes we swing in the opposite direction in a sort of equally extreme way, and then only focus on the downsides, right? And so with um, the role of Apple in China and a focus on the technology that China gained through this process, the upgrading of the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem, especially for consumer electronics, um, I think it would be a mistake to then see this as purely a transfer of U.S. know-how to China with nothing in exchange. So I think there's some kind of balanced middle path to viewing all this, and I just worry that we as a society in the U.S. kind of are swinging in our attitudes towards China and the U.S.-China trade relationship in particular between these extremes. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how to how to bring things back into balance, but I do worry that that things will go sort of too far, and we will forget some of the positive aspects and what we gained, and end up taking actions like sweeping and sky high tariffs that end up hurting ourselves as much as they hurt China, for example.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm also very curious about what you think about the new diffusion rules that
Oh yeah.
companies are forced to choose between Huawei and NVIDIA or something to that effect. A lot of people are still in shock in China, feels to me, on that. They haven't really thought of even a rhetorical reaction as yet. What do you think is going to happen with that?
So I think that this gets at a broader tension with Trump's approach to the rest of the world beyond the U.S.-China relationship, which is that the U.S. does have a lot of real leverage, access to the largest market, um, access to cutting edge technology like NVIDIA GPUs. So the reality is, and obviously the the power of the American financial system and the U.S. dollar. So these are very very powerful tools, and they're very real instruments of coercion or leverage, as it were, on the international stage.
Right.
That is one thing. On the other hand, I do think that um, this hurts American soft power, and it hurts views of the U.S. as, a credible partner versus a potentially sort of overbearing um, uh, superpower that's sort of reaching beyond its purview to try to shape the world system. And Um, yeah, I think, ironically, I was critical of the original diffusion rule under the Biden administration.
Right.
Recall that they had tried to sort of hastily put together that diffusion rule that created a three-tiered system for different countries and how many sort of how much compute they could buy in terms of U.S. GPUs from U.S. chip makers. And I was critical of that because it it sort of smacked of this long arm approach
Hmm.
to the U.S. relationship with the rest of the world, where the U.S. could influence not just things related to China, but even sort of the development and technological capabilities of other countries so overtly. And the tiered system, especially the way that it didn't line up with, say, partners and allies. It didn't line up with any sort of, so I was already critical of that. And I think this is um, even more damaging in terms of just showing other countries that how far the U.S. is willing to go to try to exert control. I don't from I try to see these things from the point of view of Malaysia or
Hmm. Right.
France or South Africa. There are other countries in the world, and they're I think they're being felt increasingly caught up in this sort of U.S.-China battle. And I think there's resentment about any effort to have the U.S. try to influence so directly, their own sort of domestic rules. And I think it applies to China as well. So there's sort of geopolitical capital that can be burned in this process.
Yep. So one last question. We discussed a lot about the reaction you have got so far, not only to your essay, but also to recent events in the US. But what about reaction from China? First, what kind of feedback have you got from your Chinese colleagues or anybody on this side about the piece? What's the most interesting feedback you've got so far?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of excitement about the piece, it seems like, um, in different circles that I'm aware of in China, and maybe picked up a little bit by Chinese media.
Mm.
Um, and I have mixed feelings about that because the point was not to glorify the advances of China per se. That was not the point. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, it was almost as much about a wake-up call to the United States. But uh, but I think there has been this moment that it connects with that extends beyond my piece that I think goes to it connects back to the DeepSeek moment as well, where yeah I think there's even a growing recognition within China itself that there are areas where Chinese tech companies are becoming more competitive, and so to the extent that um, it helps to foster greater realization in the U.S. and in China. I think that's a useful thing. Um, I wouldn't want it to become part of any propaganda campaign, obviously, but I think these things are, there's so much beyond my control. But I think it, unsurprisingly to me, has been fairly well received in certain parts of Chinese circles. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from what I see, there could be even some sense of alarm, even from Chinese circles. Not
Oh
that
yeah.
I don't agree with you, but that it's like if the Americans, well, even if it's a Chinese American researcher already saying this in mainstream US media, then maybe they're already realizing how serious it is. And uh, well, that's not necessarily a good thing for China anyway. So yes, people are already taking this, it's you or me. If you're
Mhm.
dumb, I may win. It's that kind
Mhm.
of, binary kind of thinking. And yes, it seems that thinking has taken deep root in China in recent years as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, we want to, there seems to be, at least among the actual people who are doing it, a sense of going back to the, you know, bury our bury our edge, bide our
Mhm.
time, Tao Guangyang
Right, right.
back then. If we're doing something great, don't let them know because,
Mhm.
like DeepSeek, like Manus, if they realize how good it is, they're gonna react and crush it. So
Mhm.
yeah, unfortunately, yeah, that sense is still pretty dominant, even from what I could feel on this side as well.
Yeah, yeah, and you can see some the sort of like mixed approach to some of the Chinese tech companies towards how high profile they want to make their
Right.
their
Yeah,
new announcements. You know, do you really want to show off your latest SoC chip or something like that, and market it broadly for fear of perhaps even becoming the target of future U.S. sanctions, for example?
exactly. Yeah. They
So-
see what happened to Huawei and they certainly don't want that for themselves.
right, right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Kyle, for taking this time, and thank you so much for the very insightful essay and your newsletters. I definitely look forward to reading more of it. And good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Right.